Welcome back to a new episode of podcast on the Brink. Indiana loses on Thursday night out in Portland to St. Mary's. 82-53 concludes the 21-22 season for the Hoosiers. And to talk about this whirlwind last 9 days that started last Thursday in the Big Ten tournament, ended last night out in Portland, Tyler Tachman of Inside the Hall is here with us. Tyler, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So you were at the Big Ten tournament last week. Obviously, Indiana won 2 games there and, changed the trajectory of its season. Ultimately came up short in the semifinals on Saturday. But, big picture, how significant do you think that run was in Indianapolis in order to kind of put this season to bed on a positive note? Things looked really bleak, obviously, with the losses late in the season with Rutgers and Purdue, and I think you and I both agreed that Indiana was headed for the NIT, and then the run that they went on, and kind of what you wrote this morning at Inside the Hall. This is a team that should be remembered fondly by fans. How much, I guess, is that run and what they were able to accomplish over these last 9 days, how much did that change the fact that you were able to write that based on where we were entering the tournament?
Yeah, I think it was massive because Indiana's down by 17 in the second half against Michigan. And I think, the second half in the Michigan game into the Illinois game and even the Iowa game totally did a 180 of how we're looking back on this season now, because if they lose that game to Michigan, they're in all likelihood headed to the NIT. And I think you have a lot more split on, was Mike Woodson's first season a success? And I think those few games just totally changed the narrative. And you could just feel the energy in the press conferences, just from the fans, the excitement. One of the things I wrote about was after the Illinois game is that it felt like Indiana basketball. They were playing in a big game, what Indiana basketball is supposed to be about, what it has been about for a lot of its storied history, is playing in big games, winning big games. So I think those couple of days in Indianapolis totally changed how we view the season, how we view the trajectory of the program, which is, I think, kind of crazy to say just because it was such a small sample size of games. But, I don't think that we're having this conversation if Indiana loses to Michigan. I think that there's going to be a lot more pressing questions as to where the program is headed. But, I think that run in Indianapolis removed a lot of doubt, and it kind of changed the perspective on, maybe those close games Indiana was losing, they are really close, because when you have a bunch of those losses in a row, it's easy to feel like Indiana is further away from being good than maybe they actually were. And I think getting those wins down the stretch of games kind of served as some validation that, yeah, this team is close to getting there, and they're close to being a really good team.
Yeah, I think it was really important for Mike Woodson too, because, we joked kind of on the side all season about, kind of the catchphrases of the magic pill and getting over the hump. And, Mike Woodson, those were kind of his go-to sayings that he talked about all season. And I think fans were later in the season kind of wondering, like, when is Indiana going to be able to get over the hump? When are they going to be able to win one of these close games? Well, Woodson kind of stuck to that message all season, but then he actually delivered on that late in the season, particularly in the Big Ten tournament. Being able to get those wins, I think, as you mentioned, served as validation that what he was doing from a coaching standpoint did ultimately have some impact on these guys, and they were able to win some close games. So I think that was important. And then even in the Iowa game, they come up short, but it wasn't Indiana necessarily. I don't think, early in the season, there was a lot of games where Indiana just didn't play well down the stretch of games and couldn't hold on. It took really a miraculous shooting performance from Iowa in that game to put Indiana away, and a guy banking in an improbable shot to beat them. So all three of those games they played really well, and then they're able to take that to Dayton and play on a short turnaround and get another win. So I think it was really important for Woodson and how people perceive the program that what he was talking about all season actually came to fruition here down the stretch.
And I don't know if Indiana, to me, didn't feel like never really peaked in full. They never really peaked because Xavier Johnson and Trace Jackson Davis were just sensational in the Big Ten tournament. And their pick and roll game. I mean, it was fun to watch some of the windows that Xavier Johnson was getting the ball to the Trace Jackson Davis and some of the finishes he was making. And but I feel like Indiana never fully put it together because we didn't see Miller Kopp and Parker Stewart really ever hit their stride and be able to hit shots consistently from the outside. You know, I feel like Rob Finney coming back from his injury, we never saw him have another performance like he did against Purdue, where he was, you know, really a high volume scorer off the bench. And Trey Galloway had some good moments, but especially these last couple games, it felt like he was, you know, fouling, or he was unable to defend without picking up fouls. So I think, you know, Indiana never really was clicking on all cylinders. I felt like there was still a ceiling to reach for this team, because if you have guys knocking shots down from the outside, I feel like it would just be a lethal team. And obviously the travel kind of probably played a role into it lately, and Mike Woodson didn't want to admit that. But yeah, I mean, I think all things considered, you know, looking back to where Indiana was a week ago, 2 weeks ago, you know, I think that there's a lot to be happy about moving forward.
So your experience on Tuesday, you and Gracie Barra were in Dayton for the first four games. Indiana obviously knocks off Wyoming. You know, I'm just interested, you know, I've covered the NCAA tournament I don't want to say many times, because since I've been doing this job, Indiana hasn't been to the tournament that much, but as I told you privately, kind of all the different places I've got a chance to go to watch tournament games. And there's really just nothing like the atmosphere and being there in the tournament. You know, you walk in the press room and you got all the March Madness signs, and it just feels different than what you experienced during the regular season. I'm just curious from your perspective, somebody that's covered the team now for a couple of years, what was that experience like for you, just as a member of the media, obviously a student at IU, to be able to go to Dayton and cover that game and watch Indiana get a win in March Madness?
Yeah, I agree with exactly what you said. It feels like there's a different type of energy in the air. And it was a very IU heavy crowd because it was in Dayton. So, you know, most of the crowd were IU fans, which I think kind of added to the atmosphere. But yeah, it just felt different. There was just kind of a different energy, knowing kind of the stakes. And I think there was even more gravity to it, just knowing what Indiana had been through the last week to get to that point, that, you know, at one point it kind of seemed improbable that they would even be in Dayton and they would be in the NCAA tournament. And that it was their first appearance since 2016, because, you know, Trace Jackson Davis, one of the reasons he came back was he wanted to kind of get the program moving in the right direction. And a big step in that is making it to the NCAA tournament. And, you know, it felt like things almost kind of came full circle in that, you know, this was something he set out to do and you know, was able to accomplish it. So it was just a cool experience from kind of all facets of it, just the energy and just the energy around the program too. You could feel it. And I know we've talked about when Mike Woodson was hired, things kind of flipped in terms of how it seemed like the energy was around the program. And I think that, you know, the experience in the first four and getting to the round of 64 just continues to validate, even though there were ups and downs this season, that you know, that they're moving in the right direction. And I think it's also worth mentioning too that how invaluable the experience to have, you know, guys like Trey Galloway, Jordan Geronimo get experience playing in the NCAA tournament, because that's something that Indiana hasn't had the last few seasons, having guys with, you know, like postseason experience on kind of an extended period of time. And they got a lot of that this season, which I think when you're talking about trying to build a program and build off of success, that is something, that is pretty necessary.
March can be a stressful time of year for college basketball fans. That's why I trust my friends at Cornbread Hemp, Kentucky's #1 rated CBD company with over 3,000 5-star reviews. Family owned and operated, Cornbread Hemp provides the highest quality, most potent USDA organic CBD products available with the highest legal level of THC. Not sure which product to choose? Start with their best-selling CBD gummies, made with USDA organic fruit and their signature flower-only hemp extract. Orders shipped directly from their farm in Kentucky, and best of all, Podcast on the Brink listeners get 30% off their first purchase with code HALL. Visit cornbreadhemp.com today and save 30% off of your first purchase with code HALL. The game itself on Tuesday, Indiana beats Wyoming. I don't think either team played particularly well, but what were kind of your takeaways at a high level from that game? You obviously got to watch it from as close of a vantage point as anybody, being there courtside. I'm just kind of curious what you took away from that performance and how the game was kind of played and by both teams. I thought really the difference in the game for me was Wyoming committing 15 turnovers, his two best players. I mean, for them to only lose by 8 playing that poorly kind of speaks to both teams really had their struggles. And obviously it's not the easiest situation to kind of get your name called on Selection Sunday and then have to show up somewhere 2 days later and play a game.
Yeah, it was about as ugly in person as it was on TV. So, yeah, I mean, it was definitely the type of kind of lulled back and forth game, especially just the way Wyoming plays with Maldonado taking it down in the post a lot and all their post ups and lots of turnovers and missed shots. So, from that perspective, it wasn't the most exciting game in terms of high level basketball being played. You mentioned about the perspective, of it being that Wyoming played so badly and only lost by 8. And I kind of looked at it the other way too, is that it's not easy to win a game in the NCAA tournament. And I feel like for IU to still win and not playing their best game, I thought was a positive. And like you said, you could look at it the other way too, in that it was just, for Wyoming only to lose by that much and play how badly they played. But, for IU to get by and play, far from their best of the season, I think, isn't a terrible thing.
Storyline obviously coming out of that game was the travel fiasco, getting out to Portland for the team. We saw a lot of that play out on social media with the delays and the fact that Indiana didn't get in Portland till pretty several hours into the day on Wednesday. You mentioned Mike Woodson not wanting to use that as an excuse in the aftermath of the loss last night, but how big of an impact do you think that was on last night's game with St. Mary's? Obviously, Randy Bennett, the St. Mary's coach, talked about it extensively, but it's kind of hard to know, what happens if Indiana has regular rest or regular preparation. I don't necessarily think they're going to beat St. Mary's, but 29 points is a pretty big margin. And to me, after Indiana got up, I think it was 18-14, and then they also led, I think, 21-19 at that point. It seemed just like they ran out of gas on both ends of the court. So to me, there was obviously some impact. I'm just curious, in your mind, how big of an impact do you think it ultimately was on the game?
And you also have to look back to the fact that Indiana's, they played 3 games in 3 days at the Big Ten tournament. So it's not just kind of isolated, IU has had a week off and now they're going to Dayton and then they have plane troubles and then going to Portland. This is, it's kind of a continuation of what they've just the kind of running around they've done the last week. And it kind of makes me wonder, with Iowa losing in the first round yesterday, as they go 4 games in 4 days, look like one of the hottest teams in the country, and they lose in the first round. And that makes me wonder, well, does them playing so many games in so many days, even though they had more time off than IU, do you almost not want to win the Big Ten tournament or get to the finals because you don't want to peak too early and you don't want to totally gas yourself out. Obviously, in IU's case, they needed to win those games to even have a chance to get in the NCAA tournament. But I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily if you're perceived to be in the field to not make it to Saturday or, even Sunday. So, yeah, I mean, Mike Woodson, he said he's not a coach to make excuses, but you're going from Dayton to Portland, and that's also a 3-hour time difference. So your body is just on a totally wacko clock. And, you can't ever really say how much of a difference it made, but it's hard to imagine that would have been the same team playing as if they had a week rest. So,
yeah. And also the time change this week too. I mean, so not only did they have to go 3 hours difference, we also, all of us, and I felt the effects early in the week from that, just losing that hour of sleep on, you don't really realize it until a few days into the week, and you start thinking, I'm a little bit more tired than I usually am. And that's a result of that. And like you said, Woodson he's never a coach that's made excuses. And I, you got to respect that. He didn't want to talk about it, but I think it did have some impact. In terms of the actual game, I don't want to talk too much about it. We all just watched it last night. It was a 29-point game. I think there was probably a lot of people who late in the second half were probably turning it over to the Kentucky St. Peter's game to see how that was going to play out. But rather than talking about how poorly Indiana played, I think it's also important to note that, and I kind of, when I wrote about St. Mary's, I was really impressed just kind of when I did my research on them and kind of saw their personnel and learned a little bit more about their players. They're a really good basketball team. They, move the ball well, a lot of fun to watch offensively. Defensively, I thought after the first, 10 minutes or so, they really locked in. To me, they look like a team, and who knows, they could lose tomorrow night to UCLA. But to me, they looked like the better team than Indiana. Would you agree with that, even, under normal circumstances? And what maybe impressed you most about just how St. Mary's was able to pick apart Indiana defensively?
I thought my dad made a really good comparison. We were just talking about the game, and that St. Mary's looked like one of those really good Virginia teams where they just didn't make a whole lot of mistakes, played very fundamental basketball. The mistakes that Indiana makes, they're going to make you pay for it. They just seem like very steady, very poised. And, I hadn't watched St. Mary's before that game, just being on the West Coast. But, I mean, they look legit. Like they just look like a very fundamentally sound basketball team that we've seen how even when you get up by a lot, teams can climb back into the game. That's what happened with Boise State and Memphis yesterday, where Memphis was up by a lot and Boise State came back, but St. Mary's never let IU really get into striking distance at all in the second half. So, I think that's also just kind of evidence of this is the gap between IU and where they maybe want to be in the future, that there's still, there's still a lot of room for them to get to the level that they want to be at. So, I think it was probably about as terrible as a game from an IU perspective as possible on both ends of the floor. It felt like, I know you said the highlight of the game was the cheerleader getting the ball off of the backboard. So I would probably agree with that for the most part. But I mean, St. Mary's, I'm interested to see, how far they're gonna end up going.
It's the most wonderful time of the year for college basketball fans, and our friends at Homefield have the world's most comfortable, premium licensed collegiate apparel to get you ready for all of the madness. Run by IU grads in Indianapolis, Homefield produces the most unique apparel designs available for fans of your favorite school. Over 120 different schools are available at Homefield, and more are being added each month. Our current favorites at Podcast on the Brink are the Never Daunted Crimson t-shirt with the IU Oval logo and the vintage Bison mascot hoodie. It's the most comfortable IU hoodie available anywhere. Podcast on the Brink listeners can save 15% off of your first purchase by using code BRINK15 during checkout at homefieldapparel.com. That's code BRINK15 for 15% off of your first purchase at Homefield Apparel, Yeah, and they're a team that, you mentioned Virginia, they also, from a Big Ten perspective, kind of remind me a little bit of Wisconsin, just in terms of how they execute. And they're not a team that you want to play from, with them having a big lead, because they're not going to give you those opportunities. And once they got Indiana, it was a 12-point game at halftime, and they come out in the second half and they hit that three. At that point, you felt like it was over, because Indiana really had to establish some momentum coming out of the second half to give themselves any chance. And St. Mary's, give them credit. 4 of their top 6 players are seniors. They came out and executed and knew that kind of Indiana was on the ropes, and they were able to deliver the knockout punch. And that, to me, was the game there early in the second half. So the offseason is here, Tyler, and there's a lot of questions, I think, outstanding that people are wondering when we're going to start getting some answers. I wrote something earlier today about Trace Jackson Davis, and obviously he wasn't going to say anything in the immediate aftermath yesterday in terms of his decision, but the question has to be asked. And I think it's notable just to kind of talk about that situation, because it's potentially, the biggest thing that's going to happen in terms of who stays and who goes for next season. What, in your mind, do you think the factors are going to be in terms of Trace and what he decides to do for next season? Is there an argument for him to come back, or do you think, this run here late in the season maybe pushed his stock to the point where maybe it's not going to get any better and he wants to go make a run at it and see what he can do from an NBA standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, he was definitely playing great basketball down the last few games. Like, it was kind of fun to watch the turnaround that he made from struggling a little bit towards the end of the season to just being absolutely dominant, playing at an All-American level. And, I definitely think that, he helped his draft stock, heading into the summer. As far as him coming back, the thing that I've kind of said is, if he's not going to try to shoot jump shots, if he's not even going to attempt that consistently, I don't think his draft stock can get any higher. I think he's shown everything he can do around the rim, everything that he can do from a defensive standpoint. So I think if you're looking at what he is able to do inside the paint, I think he's reached his ceiling. I just don't see much more that he can do. Now, if he shows a willingness to shoot, that's the thing that's gonna raise his draft stock, and that's the thing that we've been talking about the last few seasons. But he hadn't even shown a willingness to shoot this season, and to me, that was what was concerning. It wasn't like he was taking a bunch of shots and just totally bricking them. He wasn't even really trying. So if he's not going to try, if it's going to be the same story next season, where he's the same kind of dominant inside, but not going to try to step out, I don't see much more that he can develop. But if he is going to make a concerted effort to show NBA scouts, hey, I'm gonna consistently shoot this outside shot, and this is, I'm gonna show you that I deserve to be a first round pick, then I think it's worth him coming back. But if it's going to be kind of the same thing where he's just dominant down low, like, I just think he's proved kind of everything he has at this point. And maybe an NBA team takes a chance on him, and that he's a really athletic guy. He's quick. He has good hands, good footwork, and let's put him in situations where he can develop that jump shot. And we know that a lot of the draft is based on potential. And if you look at him, well, maybe if you can develop that jump shot, he can be a really good stretch for in the NBA just because of his athleticism too. So, I think it's interesting. I also think that the narrative was intriguing kind of towards the end of the season, where it seemed like people were loading onto him and saying this team would be better without him, that Indiana is force feeding him too much, especially on the offensive end. And it's just kind of disrupting the flow of the offense. And I feel like looking back on that now, I couldn't disagree with that more, because I don't know where this Indiana team would be without him. And it's hard to say if Trace Jackson Davis wants to come back next season, no, we don't want him. Like, I think that Indiana is obviously a better team with him. And just the level he was playing, I mean, it's hard unless you're going to bring in some really high level guys from the transfer portal to replace that production. So, I think looking back on it, the argument that, he's holding Indiana back, I just don't see it much having much validity anymore, just given the way that he was playing down the stretch.
Yeah, one other factor is he's already 22. So if he stays another year, by this time next year, he would be 23 going into the draft. And it's, I'm not saying it would be impossible for him to get picked, and he may not even get picked this year if he goes. He may never get picked. We don't know for sure, but I think for him, it would at least be prudent this time around to test and see what's out there. He hasn't done that the last two off seasons. You kind of get an idea of where you stand in the NBA's mind. If you get a combine invite, you can go to the combine and see what happens and then still come back. So I think at minimum that, that's something that he should do and should want to do, because that's the most valuable feedback you can get. I think when you get down to the rest of the roster, that's when things get a little bit more interesting. Obviously, Race Thompson and Parker Stewart went through senior night, and we were told at that time by a spokesperson from IU that them going through senior night didn't necessarily mean that they weren't coming back. But there were other players on the team: Xavier Johnson, Miller Kopp, Rob Finnessy, Michael Durr, who were all in their fourth year of college and didn't go through senior night. So interpret that how you will. What do you kind of see as the most important things for this coaching staff to figure out in terms of who's coming and going for next season? Obviously, you don't want to speculate on or say like who Indiana fans should want to come back or who they should want to go. But it seems clear to me that this team is going to have to go in the transfer portal and make some moves. I don't think you want to just run it back with everybody and have a couple guys leave and bring in some freshmen. I think that there's going to have to be some upgrades made talent wise. Is it Race Thompson that you start with next and kind of see what happens there, or who in your eyes are kind of the most important guys for Indiana to bring back next season?
I think not even looking at who they're going to bring back, but the most pressing issue I feel like is just wing scoring. And whether that's going to be Miller Kopp and Parker Stewart coming back and, improving on maybe their assertiveness, or whether that's going to be going into the transfer portal and trying to get a high volume guy, catch and shoot, spot up shooter guy. I think that's the one element of Indiana's offense that it was really missing, especially down the stretch, where if you have a couple guys that can knock down shots at a consistent clip at a high volume, that Indiana's offense becomes really lethal, especially with the way Xavier Johnson and Trace Jackson Davis were both playing. And you have CJ Gunn coming in as a freshman, and he had a really good senior season, and he showed the ability to shoot it. I just don't know coming in as a freshman how reliable that'll be with obviously just the transition to college, of how much you'll be able to rely on him as a guy that can produce at a consistent level. And the second thing for me is just the point guard play, because we saw how big of a difference that made when Xavier Johnson was playing well. Indiana was just a different team. So, if he stays around, I think that's huge for Indiana. If he decides to move on, I think that's a need that is pretty pressing, just given the kind of uncertainty in that point guard room. I feel like you said, we don't know if Rob Finnessy is going to stay or leave. And he said he didn't want to go through senior night activities just to leave that door possibly open. Christian Lander, I mean, it's just kind of been an enigmatic season and career for him. He really didn't play at all, whether it be the leg injury or just behind Xavier Johnson and Rob Finnessy. So I think whatever happens, whoever's leaving, whoever's staying, that Indiana needs to try to lock up that point guard position and make it solid, because the difference that good point guard play can make this season was pretty evident, and just kind of the ups and downs that Indiana had this season. Also, Jalen Hood-Schifino coming in next season as a freshman, highly recruited guy. Obviously can have a really, really big impact potentially, but same thing where just kind of that transition into your freshman year, we saw Tamar Bates kind of have struggles with that consistency, even though he was a 5-star guy. So I think the wing scoring and making sure that you're solid at the point guard position, I think kind of to me are the two biggest things.
Yeah, we'll have the whole offseason to talk a lot about what I'm just getting ready to ask you right now, but I'm curious, just off the top of my head, the three guys that I look at in terms of Indiana really needing to make an off-season leap if they're going to come back. Obviously we don't know who's coming, who's going to leave, but I would say Jordan Geronimo, Trey Galloway, and Tamar Bates have huge off seasons in front of them. I think all three of those guys are kind of foundation pieces for what Mike Woodson is going to want to do moving forward. Can you just speak to each of those guys maybe and what you think maybe their long-term potential is in this program and how you see them fitting in down the road for this group?
I think we saw Jordan Geronimo continue to kind of inch towards and at least show that potential in the Wyoming game, and just the way that he can be a game changer. And the thing that he has going for him, I mean, he's just, his athleticism and energy just off the charts, NBA caliber. I think a lot of people would agree with, and I think the next step for him is just polishing the game. He's a guy that Mike Woodson said earlier this season, is obviously a guy that just hasn't played a lot of basketball compared to other people at this level. So I think it's polishing the game and being a guy that you can rely on a consistent basis to put up to put up 10 points and 6 rebounds or 11 points and 7 rebounds, kind of the consistency that we've seen out of Race Thompson this season, and kind of develop into, obviously Jordan Geronimo is a very different player than Race Thompson, but just kind of that game in and game out, being able to produce. As far as Trey Galloway, I think it was noticeable the spark that he gave. It was an injury kind of filled season for him, but he's a guy that just has a lot of intangibles to him. I think he kind of embodies the toughness that Indiana wants to have. I think him developing that outside shot will be huge, but the fact that I think he, going into the season, you look at him as a guy that maybe doesn't fit into what the offense that Mike Woodson wants to run. And the fact that despite that, he was still able to be so effective in creating for others and making energy plays, I think was really important. And Tamar Bates, we saw kind of his potential to be a high volume scorer early in the season. He had a really good game against St. John's. There were flashes, I think, in the Bahamas too. And it was just kind of a really up and down season for him. He never seemed to really find his stride in terms of being able to be a guy that comes off the bench and be a reliable scorer. But, all of the tangible kind of, characteristics seem to be there for him. And he's a guy I could definitely see that makes a big leap into his sophomore season, just as he kind of gets more comfortable. I definitely agree. All those three guys moving forward are definitely important as foundational pieces.
Tyler, thanks for your time today. I know we're talking as NCAA tournament games are going on, and I'm sure you want to get back to watching the tournament. I'm sure everybody's enjoying the tournament. It's obviously, I think, the best time of year for college hoops, and a lot of fun this first weekend. So many great games. Unfortunately, Indiana's run comes to an end on the first day of games, but plenty, of course, to write about still and talk about here as we get into the off season. We'll continue to have everything covered on Inside the Hall. Tyler, thanks for your time this week on the show, and we'll be back again, everybody, next week with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.